It was one of those lazy Saturday mornings, the kind where you just don't want to do anything productive, but know you've got to check off a few items from the to-do list before the weekend can truly begin. I was sipping my usual latte from Starbucks, hot, extra shot, no foam, and wandering the aisles of Whole Foods. I love this routine. I didn't really need much. Maybe some fresh fruit, some of that overpriced almond butter, and of course the freshly baked sourdough I could never resist. It's funny, I've always found comfort in these simple errands. They offer a break from the chaos of work and allow me a little time to clear my head. I'd even grown accustomed to the laid-back vibe of the Santa Monica Whole Foods. The people there were friendly, and even though it was usually packed, it felt like a second home. Every Saturday, without fail, I would make my way through the aisles, picking up what I needed while the light chatter around me felt like background noise. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until that day. As I turned down the aisle where the dairy products are stacked, I saw a man who seemed vaguely familiar. He wasn't someone I knew from the area, but something about his eyes made me think we'd met before. Not that he was staring, but there was this sort of knowing glint in his gaze. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a worn jacket and jeans, looking like he could have been a local or just passing through. I gave him a nod, smiled briefly, and reached for a carton of milk, but just as I was about to turn back toward the aisle, he stepped closer. He looked at me for a moment before speaking. "You know, he's not who you think he is," he said, his voice low, almost like he didn't want anyone else to hear. I paused, confused. "Excuse me?" The stranger leaned in, his eyes scanning the aisle as if ensuring no one else was listening. "Your partner," he said again, his tone now more serious, almost too matter-of-fact. "He's been lying to you, you should know." I was taken aback. My mind raced, trying to process what he was implying. I didn't recognize him, and I definitely wasn't sure if I should be alarmed or just chalk this up to some random stranger trying to stir up drama. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as possible, but inside, my heart was racing. The stranger gave a small, almost pitying smile. "You're in for a surprise. It's not what you think. You're being played." Before I could ask him what the hell he meant, he turned and walked briskly away, disappearing down the next aisle before I could get another word in. I stood frozen in place for a few moments, staring at the spot where he had been. The stranger's words echoed in my mind, though I didn't want to believe them. Who was this person, and why was he saying something so cryptic about my partner? Could there be any truth to what he'd said? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the bizarre encounter. It was probably nothing, I reasoned. Maybe he had mistaken me for someone else, or maybe it was just some random person who liked to stir the pot. But as I continued to shop, something in me wouldn't let it go. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if he was telling the truth? What if there was something my partner wasn't being honest about? I decided to push the thought aside for the moment. I had groceries to buy after all. But as I moved through the aisles, the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right stayed with me. It was one of those strange gut feelings, the kind that you can't shake, no matter how hard you try. And despite the fact that I tried to keep my mind on the task at hand, I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on with my partner. After all, we'd been together for years. We had routines, our favorite spots like the Cheesecake Factory on weekends, or grabbing sushi at Sushi Roku in West Hollywood when we were feeling fancy. He was my constant, and our life together seemed perfect. Or so I thought. As I finished my shopping and checked out, the feeling didn't fade. I drove home, my mind spinning with the possibilities of what the stranger had said. Could there have been something hidden from me all this time? Could he have been lying all along? The more I thought about it, the more the seeds of doubt began to grow. And that night, when I sat across from my partner at our favorite dinner spot, I couldn't help but feel that something was off. The casual laughter we shared felt forced, and every glance between us seemed to carry unspoken tension. Little did I know, this seemingly innocent errand would be the beginning of unraveling a truth that I wasn't ready to face. The grocery store had never felt so big. I shuffled through the aisles, trying to focus on the list in my phone, but the words seemed to blur together. My mind kept drifting back to the stranger I'd just encountered. That brief moment by the dairy section was lingering in my thoughts, gnawing at me. What did he mean by "you're being played"? Who was he, and why did he seem so sure of himself? I tried to shake it off. After all, I didn't know this guy. Maybe he was just someone trying to stir up trouble, or worse, someone who enjoyed playing games with people's heads. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling settling in my chest. There was something about his eyes, how they locked onto me, like he knew exactly who I was, like he had been waiting for this moment. It was unnerving to say the least. I turned the corner into the next aisle, determined to focus on my task. The produce section was up ahead, and I needed to pick out a couple of avocados. But as I reached for the greenest one, I felt a presence behind me. A familiar feeling crept up my spine. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about the way this person moved seemed too familiar. And then I heard the voice. "Funny seeing you here." I froze. The voice was calm, nonchalant, but it cut through the mundane hum of the store like a knife. I turned slowly, and there he was again, the stranger from earlier. He was standing just a few feet away, looking at me with that same strange knowing in his eyes. He wasn't a threat, or at least he didn't seem like one, but something about the way he was standing there made me feel like I was being watched. Like I was the subject of some silent observation. And just like before, he didn't seem in a hurry. He wasn't pushing a cart, wasn't looking at the shelves like a typical shopper. No, this man was just there. Waiting, watching. I couldn't help but feel a rush of nerves. "You again," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed me. He smiled faintly. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, his tone almost too soothing, too deliberate. He looked around, scanning the aisle briefly, before leaning in just slightly, lowering his voice. "Not many people know this, but your partner's been seeing someone else. Someone you wouldn't expect." I blinked, stunned by the statement. "What?" The stranger's eyes flickered, a slight gleam of satisfaction in them. "Yeah, I guess you never paid attention to the little things, huh? Like how he always says he's working late at the office, but he's never actually there. Or the way he's suddenly too tired for weekend plans. Or how you've never met any of his friends because they're always too busy." My breath caught in my throat. It was as if the world had suddenly gone quiet, and the only sound was his voice. This couldn't be happening. How did he know this? This wasn't just speculation or an offhand comment. The details he was dropping were too precise, too real. They felt too close to home. I glanced around the store, suddenly hyper-aware of how exposed I felt. The fluorescent lights above seemed too bright, too glaring. The soft buzz of the store's background music became deafening in my ears. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Who are you?" I asked, the words coming out more sharply than I intended. The stranger gave me a slight, almost smug smile, as if he were enjoying the discomfort he'd created. "Does it really matter? I'm just a messenger, here to make sure you see the truth." "Truth about what?" I was starting to feel unmoored, like the ground beneath my feet was shifting. "About him," the stranger replied coolly, tapping his temple. "You think you know everything about your partner, but you don't. I'm just letting you know that you should start paying attention." With that, he took a step back, and before I could even respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the next aisle as if nothing had happened. I stood there, completely paralyzed, my fingers still clutching the avocado. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the cold sweat gathering on my forehead. I looked at the avocado in my hand, but it didn't seem to matter anymore. Nothing felt real. It was like everything I thought I knew about my life was suddenly under question. The stranger's words replayed in my mind like a broken record. "He's been seeing someone else. Someone you wouldn't expect." How could he know that? How could he know things that no one else could? I was at a loss for words. I couldn't even tell if I was being paranoid, or if there was some truth to it. It was all too much. Too fast. My hand shook as I put the avocado back on the shelf, suddenly too tired to finish my shopping. I needed to get out of there. I needed answers, but I couldn't figure out where to even start. Was this some twisted joke? Or was this stranger really trying to tell me something that I wasn't ready to hear? I walked quickly toward the checkout, ignoring the growing pit in my stomach. I didn't know how I was supposed to feel. Part of me wanted to confront my partner right then and there, but another part of me, the rational part, the part that wanted everything to stay normal, told me to calm down, to not overreact. But in the back of my mind, the seed of doubt had already been planted, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it kept growing, inching its way toward the truth. By the time I made it home, my mind was racing. The stranger's words echoed in my head like a haunting melody I couldn't shake. He's been seeing someone else, someone you wouldn't expect. I couldn't focus on anything. Even the steady hum of the car's engine seemed too loud, too intrusive. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were turning white, but the sensation didn't bring me any comfort. If anything, it only made the situation more real. It was all so surreal, almost as if I were trapped in a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I pulled into the driveway, but before I even turned off the engine, my phone buzzed. A text message popped up on the screen. "Hey babe, I'll be home a little late tonight. Work stuff, I'll make it up to you, promise. XO." I stared at the message for a moment, trying to digest the words. It was the same excuse he always used. Work. It was always work. But I couldn't ignore what that stranger had said. The whole thing felt like a sick game. Why would he know this? And why would he target me, someone completely unrelated to him? And if it was all a lie, why did it feel so real? I needed to talk to someone. I needed answers. But who? Who could I turn to in this mess? I couldn't trust anyone now, not even my own instincts. Everything felt off kilter. The world seemed to be spinning out of control, and I was left in the center of it, helpless. I sent a quick message to my best friend Melissa. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at the Cheesecake Factory later?" I knew she'd understand. The Cheesecake Factory was our place, a spot we'd gone to countless times over the years, the one place that felt familiar and comforting. It was where we celebrated birthdays, broke up with boyfriends, and made big decisions. If there was anywhere I could try to piece this all together, it was there. I pulled into the parking lot of the Cheesecake Factory at the scheduled time, my stomach in knots. The restaurant's soft lighting and inviting atmosphere were a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. As I walked toward the entrance, I felt the weight of every passing second. Every little detail felt magnified. The smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the air, the clink of glasses being set down, the low murmur of chatter. It all felt distant, like I was a part of a dream I couldn't escape. I found Melissa already seated at a booth near the window, her familiar face offering me a small, reassuring smile. As soon as I sat down, she raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing that something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I couldn't even look her in the eye. The thoughts swirling in my head were too chaotic, too fragmented. "I don't know, something happened today. Something really messed up." I looked up at her, and without saying another word, I told her everything. The encounter at the grocery store, the stranger's cryptic comments, and the details he knew about my partner. I told her about how his words kept replaying in my mind, how every little detail he mentioned seemed to confirm the worst. As I spoke, I saw Melissa's expression shift from concern to shock. Her eyes widened and she leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't think he's telling the truth, do you?" I shook my head, a sense of disbelief washing over me. I don't know what to think anymore. But something about it felt too real. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling in. The cheesecake I'd ordered, my usual slice of white chocolate raspberry truffle, suddenly didn't seem appetizing. I pushed it aside, lost in thought. That's messed up," Melissa said after a long pause, her words laced with both confusion and sympathy. "But you don't know for sure, right? I mean, you haven't talked to him about it yet?" I nodded slowly. "No, I haven't. I don't even know how to bring it up." Melissa bit her lip, thinking, "Look, I know this might sound insane, but you need to talk to him. If there's even a chance that what that guy said is true, You need to know, even if it hurts. I glanced out the window at the bustling streets of our city. The traffic was moving steadily, people walking with purpose, completely unaware of the turmoil that was raging inside me. The Cheesecake Factory, with its warm, inviting atmosphere, felt like a world away from my reality. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, everything had felt normal. But what if it's not true? What if this is all just some sick game? I asked, my voice trembling. If it's not true, then you'll know, she replied, her eyes soft with empathy. But you can't keep living in this kind of uncertainty. You deserve to know the truth. Her words struck a chord deep inside me. It was true. I couldn't keep going on like this, second-guessing every interaction, every moment with my partner. I needed to know. The stranger's words had planted a seed, and whether I liked it or not, I needed to see where it led. Taking a deep breath, I picked up my phone and texted my partner. We need to talk, it's urgent. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The phone buzzed almost immediately. He was reading the message, probably confused by the sudden shift in tone. The next few moments felt like an eternity. I couldn't help but wonder how this conversation would go. Would he be truthful? Would he deny everything? Or would he confirm what the stranger had said? The silence between us in that moment felt suffocating. I could hear the chatter around me, the clink of plates, the faint hum of background music, but all of it seemed so far away. My world had narrowed down to this one moment, this one decision. And just like that, the waiting game had begun. The drive home felt like a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I tried to process everything. The weight of the conversation with Melissa, the stranger's cryptic words, and the anxiety swirling in my chest, it all felt suffocating. My mind raced, darting between disbelief and suspicion, and it was like I was caught in a tug-of-war between the two. Could it be true? I kept asking myself, my heart pounding with every turn of the wheel. Maybe it was just some twisted prank. Maybe this is all a misunderstanding. But every time I tried to convince myself it was all just nonsense, another part of me screamed that I had to know the truth. What if it's real? What if the secret the stranger revealed wasn't just a random guess, but a painful reality I couldn't ignore? As I drove through the familiar streets of Santa Monica, I glanced out the window at the quiet beach, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The salty ocean air that usually calmed me now felt foreign. Everything seemed distant, as if I were walking through a fog. I passed the restaurants we'd visited countless times, like the Lobster, with its bright patio overlooking the ocean, and I couldn't help but replay moments in my mind, moments that now felt suspicious. I had to admit, I hadn't been fully present in our relationship lately. He'd always been so busy with work, and I had excused it, thinking it was just a phase. But looking back now, I realized how many times he'd been too busy to make plans, how often he'd canceled at the last minute, or made excuses about work meetings that ran late. All those times I brushed it off suddenly felt like red flags waving in front of me. I stopped at a gas station in Santa Monica, needing a moment to catch my breath and clear my mind. The neon lights flickered above the pumps, and the air was thick with the smell of gasoline. I stepped out of the car, the cool breeze hitting my face, but it did little to calm my nerves. My mind kept spiraling, asking the same questions over and over. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge inside the convenience store and wandered around the gas station lot, trying to make sense of the chaos in my head. The gentle hum of the gas station's fluorescent lights was the only sound, but it seemed to drown out everything else. The passing cars, the distant waves crashing on the shore. I couldn't stop thinking about how, just a few hours ago, everything seemed so normal. We had plans for the weekend, we had made jokes over breakfast. Everything was fine, until it wasn't. Was I being paranoid? Was I just reading into things, letting this stranger's words twist my perception? Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The stranger had known too much, had been too specific. I couldn't just dismiss it as a coincidence. What if it wasn't a lie? What if everything he said was true? What if he'd been seeing someone else? I thought about the times we had gone out for dinner at local spots like the Bungalow, one of our favorite bars in Santa Monica, and how he always seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. I had told myself it was just his busy schedule, that he was probably just stressed with work. But now, those little moments felt like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't noticed before. I kept replaying the text message he had sent earlier. "I'll be home a little late tonight. Work stuff. I'll make it up to you, promise." It sounded just like the dozens of other excuses he'd made before. But this time, it felt like an empty promise. How many times had I accepted those excuses without questioning them? How many times had I let the idea of his busy life take precedence over spending time together? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I tried calling him. No answer. Of course, I thought bitterly. Too busy for a quick call, huh? I leaned against the side of my car, staring at the gas station's flickering sign. The tension in my body was unbearable, like I was about to snap. I needed to hear his voice, to confront him. I had to know the truth, even if it broke me. If he had been lying to me, if he had been hiding something so huge, then I needed to face it, no matter how painful it would be. I texted him again. "I know about her. We need to talk, now." I didn't know what else to do. The words felt like they had been pulled from me, a gut reaction to the chaos unraveling in my mind. There was no turning back now. This was it. As I waited for his response, my mind shifted back to the stranger at the grocery store. Who was he? Why had he approached me with this information? It was as if fate had forced me to face the truth, to confront something that had been lingering in the shadows for far too long. I could feel the weight of what was coming, the reality of what I might soon learn. But despite all the fear, there was a sense of clarity that emerged within me. The uncertainty, the mental back and forth was no longer consuming me. The truth was out there, and I had to face it. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure. This moment, standing here at the gas station, would be the turning point. The beginning of the end, or maybe, just maybe, the start of something new. The moment I stepped through the door of our apartment, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. It wasn't the familiar comfort of home that greeted me, it was a sense of impending confrontation that seemed to hang in the air. The scent of dinner wafted from the kitchen, something he had made, a dish he knew I loved. It was our usual routine after a long day, but tonight, everything felt different. There was no warmth in the air, no sense of peace. Only tension. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to confront him, not like this, but the uncertainty had been gnawing at me all day, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The stranger's words echoed in my mind, each syllable sharper than the last. "She's not the only one, you know." I couldn't shake that sentence. It had followed me all the way home, like a shadow that refused to let go. I needed answers. I set my keys down with more force than I intended and walked toward the kitchen. He was standing there, stirring something in a pot, his back to me, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. "You're home late," he said, turning around with that usual smile on his face. It was almost too normal, like nothing had happened. I nodded, my throat tight, and took a deep breath. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to say it. "I know what you're hiding," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite myself. The words felt foreign, but I pushed them out anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. He froze for a moment, his eyes locking onto mine, then quickly glanced down at the floor, as if to avoid looking me in the eye. That was all the confirmation I needed. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice suddenly tight, trying to mask the unease that was creeping into his tone. "I know about her," I continued, my words barely above a whisper. "The woman you've been seeing, the one you've been keeping from me." He stood still, frozen, like he was trying to decide whether to confess or deny it. The silence between us stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I could see the internal struggle in his eyes. And then, finally, he sighed deeply, as if the weight of the world had just been placed on his shoulders. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he muttered, his words barely audible. He lowered his head, almost ashamed. "I'm sorry, I thought I could handle it, that I could keep it separate, but I guess I couldn't. I felt my heart drop into my stomach, but I refused to let the tears fall. I had to stay strong, even if everything inside me wanted to crumble. "Who is she?" I demanded, my voice steadier now, though my hands were trembling. There was a brief pause before he finally spoke. "Her name's Natalie. We met a few months ago. It was just supposed to be one night, a mistake. But then it kept happening. I don't know how it got this far." I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind racing. Natalie, her name hit me like a punch to the gut. She was the woman I'd heard about in whispers, the one who had been keeping my partner occupied while I'd been none the wiser. The woman who had been living a parallel life right under my nose. "We've been together for a while now," he continued, his voice tinged with guilt. "I never meant for it to get this complicated. I thought it was just a fling, but then feelings got involved, and I didn't know how to stop it. I was afraid of losing you." I closed my eyes, trying to process everything. The anger was bubbling up, but I couldn't let it take control, not yet. Instead, I focused on the pit in my stomach, on the feeling that everything we had built was starting to unravel in front of me. "How long exactly?" I asked, my voice low. "A few months," he admitted, his eyes not meeting mine. The weight of his confession hit me like a freight train. A few months? How could he have kept something like this hidden for so long? All the times we had spent together, the plans we'd made, the love we'd shared, had it all been a lie? "I don't know how to fix this," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I've hurt you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right, but I need you to understand. I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake, a huge mistake." I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I needed space. I couldn't stay here, listening to him try to justify what he'd done. "You don't get it," I said, my voice rising. "It's not just about the mistake. It's about everything, about the lies, the secrets, the way you've kept this from me for months. You've been living two lives, and I had no idea. How could you do this to me?" He stood up too, reaching for me, but I stepped back, unable to let him touch me. The anger was overwhelming, and the disappointment was even worse. I had trusted him with everything, and he had betrayed me. I know, he said quickly, his voice frantic. "I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I will do anything to make it right. Just tell me what I need to do." I couldn't answer him right away. I needed time to process it all, to understand why this had happened and if there was any way to move forward from here. But in that moment, the only thing I could do was step back and breathe. The revelation left me with more questions than answers. The lies were exposed, but the truth seemed so much more complicated now. What came next? Could I ever trust him again? Could our relationship ever be the same after this? The room was heavy with silence, and all I could do was stand there, unsure of where to go from here. The person I thought I knew, the man I had loved, had shattered everything with a secret I never saw coming. And now I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces, even though I wasn't sure I knew how. After the confrontation, I was left standing in a blur of emotions, anger, confusion, hurt, and betrayal, all swirling together. The evening had ended in a way I never could have predicted, and the reality of the situation was beginning to settle in like a cold weight pressing down on my chest. He had confessed, but I still didn't know what I was supposed to do with that confession. The gravity of it all, how everything we had built together had been tainted by secrets and lies, was almost too much to bear. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, each one more overwhelming than the last. How had I not seen the signs? Was I so blind to the little things that I had missed the bigger picture? I had trusted him, loved him, and now it felt like everything had been a lie. A part of me wanted to scream, to throw everything in his face, but the other part of me just wanted to run away from it all and never look back. The next morning, the sun rose, but everything felt different. I went through the motions of my usual routine, grabbing coffee from the local Starbucks, running errands at Whole Foods, but it all felt detached, like I was walking through a fog. I hadn't spoken to him since our confrontation, and honestly, I wasn't sure what to say anymore. The truth was, I didn't know what to do next. Should I stay and try to work through the mess? Or was it time to leave and start fresh? Each option felt equally daunting. I spent the next few days trying to process everything, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the betrayal wasn't just about him being with someone else. It was about the trust that had been shattered, the foundation of our relationship that had cracked beyond repair. Every moment we had shared now seemed tainted by the secret he'd been keeping. Even the places we used to go together, the restaurant dates, the little coffee shops, the walks around the neighborhood, felt different now. I couldn't walk into that old sushi bar we used to love without wondering if he had been with her there, or if those moments had been nothing more than a front. I remember walking past P.F. Chang's, our usual Friday night spot, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. It used to be our place. The place where we would laugh over dim sum and share stories about our week. But now, it felt like a place I could never go back to. A part of me wanted to walk in, sit down at one of the booths, and pretend like nothing had changed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it would never be the same. That the warmth we had once shared in those places had been replaced by coldness. There were other spots too, local parks we used to stroll through, the little bakery down the street where we always got cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. Each one of those places had once held so many memories, but now they were tainted by the thought of what he had done. I found myself resenting these places, hating that they had become reminders of a time that felt so distant, so unreal. The hardest part, however, was deciding what to do next. Should I give him another chance? Try to work through the hurt and rebuild the trust that had been shattered? Or was it time to walk away, to leave the relationship behind and start fresh, away from the pain and the lies? I spent hours thinking about it, talking to friends, reading articles about forgiveness and healing, but nothing seemed to give me a clear answer. One part of me still loved him. I couldn't just turn off those feelings. But another part of me was furious. Furious that he had disrespected me, that he had hidden this from me for so long, that he had taken advantage of my trust. I didn't know if I could forgive him. And even if I did, would it ever be the same? I realized that I needed time to figure it out. Time to clear my head and decide what was best for me, not just for him. I had spent so much of my life trying to make others happy, trying to make the relationship work, that I had forgotten about my own happiness. I spent the next few days focusing on myself, taking long walks along the beach in Santa Monica to clear my mind, and reconnecting with friends who reminded me of my worth. Slowly, I began to remember who I was before I met him. I remembered what it was like to laugh without worry, to enjoy life without feeling like something was always about to fall apart. There were no easy answers, and I didn't have it all figured out, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity. The decision wasn't going to be made overnight, and I had to be okay with that. I needed to stop rushing into decisions based on emotion and start making choices that were right for me. Would I stay, or was it time for a fresh start? The truth was, I didn't know. But I knew that no matter what I decided, I was going to be okay. As I walked past the Cheesecake Factory, the last place we'd had dinner together before everything changed, I thought about how different things felt now. The decision ahead wasn't just about him, it was about me too. It was about reclaiming my life and moving forward with or without him. I didn't have all the answers, but I was finally ready to find my own path. And that at least felt like a step in the right direction.